about being your George Soros. Okay.
um, well, I mean, that's the thing, though. I mean, I'll strip for $10. Like, I'm a low rent intellectual stripper, like, I'm a truck stop intellectual stripper. Like, there's no amount of money that I won't like lay ideas bare for.
Yeah, you really have done pretty incredible work on the Mixed Mental Arts Club.com. I mean, you could publish a book.
Well, I mean, we could do that, but the point is that if you have the opportunity to, I mean, what's the real challenge, right? Like, what are we all sort of all struggling with in general in the world today? And as you said, right, in terms of the topic and the focus of this podcast, it's how do we know what to believe anymore? And I could worry and like try and figure out a book, and some people would read it at who like the New York Times and like to hang out at fancy cocktail parties and all that sort of stuff. But that doesn't really do me much good because in general, that audience sort of, it's all very like food for thoughty. They read these ideas and then they're like, wow, that's something to talk about for a few weeks. And then we move on to the next thing. And so it's not a particularly satisfying audience. I actually find that, a much more general audience, people who want like actual practical advice that can help make their lives better, which is who we wrote Straight A Conspiracy for, is a much more satisfying audience. So, and in the age of the internet, the real challenge is that I mean, the internet's incredibly good at solving problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it does a great job with cat videos and memes and inventing household appliances that I never knew that I wanted.
That's right.
So that hive mind solves problems if it has the raw materials. The problem is that for a lot of these things, it just doesn't have the raw materials. And so my job is to give the internet the raw materials, and then podcasters like yourself, meme generators, people who make funny viral videos can go out and remix those ideas endlessly, and we can actually start to have productive conversations about some of these topics.
Idea sex.
Exactly, it's all about idea sex. But essentially, and the idea sex. I mean, that's what's so great about all this stuff is that you can have these like super complicated books, but then it boils down to these very simple ideas like idea sex. And already from cultural evolution, genetic evolution, they work in basically the same way. And what's the effect of incest, right? Genetic incest. When you marry your cousin and you have babies with your cousin, you get these weird babies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of weird, like inbred babies in terms of ideas right now. Like you go on the college campuses, there's some weird ideas going on there because they've just kept, the same ideas keep about, sort of liberals and social justice and identity politics keep feeding in on each other, and you just get more and more deformed baby. And then on the alt-right, you have like, we're so angry about feminism and women and, like trying to deny that there are differences between cultures. And then you get that idea sex feeding back in, and eventually you end up with like these massively weird incestuous ideologies that are essentially fascism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's just a lot of ugly inbred idea babies around right
Yes.
now.
So,
And it's not that any of these ideologies are totally wrong, right? Like there's a little grain of truth to some of them, and there are legitimate grievances there. But let's have beautiful mulatto idea babies that come from like this really hot, they've got like that dark skin, but then the green eyes that really pop, and like that's the kind of sexy idea babies that we want, and that involves really that sort of cross pollination. You got to breed outside your gene pool. You can't like go all Appalachian on this shit, right?
that's a great way to put it. I really want to have idea babies now. I mean,
Yeah.
I was just.
Well, we're having right now, Michael. We're having an idea baby.
Oh, I appreciate it. Hopefully, this thing is a mongoloid. I was just, and I'll move on. Is CNN basically idea rapist, or
no, I think so. I mean, you can really, if you were to really go down this. So I've been thinking a lot about Larry King.
Yes.
And Larry King, it's amazing. Like he has, I mean, you could have Stalin on the Larry King show, and they would have a really nice conversation.
Yes.
Right? Like And that's, Larry King, what he does is he helps people mentally masturbate, right? And it doesn't really
Yes.
matter like who you are or what ideas you're bringing on the show. At no point does Larry King ever find a problem with them, right? He just sort of like empathizes with you so much that he's like, wow, I mean, well, what was it like? I mean, talk to me about the tough sacrifices you had to make, Stalin, in order to fight off the Nazis. Oh, the worst, and da da da. And you can have Hitler on and be like, 1933, man, the Depression, that was a real problem, and you really pulled the country together, right? I mean, if you want to have a conversation with literally anybody and never challenge any of their ideas and just sort of make them feel great about themselves, like you can literally mentally masturbate them, and Larry King does that. And at a certain point, like having all these people sort of bukkake on our faces is not really going to move us forward. You need somebody who's willing to come in and be like, okay, let's look at your idea, baby, and I'm sorry, but it's a little bit deformed and a little bit ugly, and there are some real problems with it. And that's the direction that we've been moving the Brian Callen show. And I will tell you that it doesn't necessarily go well for yours truly.
I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of interesting, like the podcast that Reese released most recently, and then the one before that. The one before that, we started talking about echo chambers, and we were really talking about sort of the liberal echo chamber. And, I got a bunch of comments from people, including my mother, who were like, wow, how come you're being so one-sided and attacking the liberals and blah, 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 right? And that's what is, as we know in any family conversation, sometimes what is said is not what is heard, right? And that's just the nature of human thinking. And it's not that do I think my mom is a bad person? No, I don't. I actually like my mom. She's very good to me. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't have sort of certain beliefs, a certain culture, a certain worldview, and so therefore that she hears certain things in a slightly different way because she reacts emotionally to them, and therefore they get distorted into something other than what is being said. By the same token, the most recent podcast I did was with this guy Peter Schiff, who is a libertarian. And I don't think Peter Schiff understands capitalism, which is really problematic. Because what capitalism is about the free market. Now, markets have rules, right? Like if you go to Adam Smith didn't invent the market; he just spotted markets were there as a phenomenon that already existed. And you can go to a market in Italy, you can go to a market in Cambodia, you can go to a market in Ghana. Like markets naturally appear in societies without the benefit of Adam Smith, and markets always have rules. It's not a free for all. Right? There are, you can set up your stall here. There are certain rules that you have to follow so the market functions well and all that sort of stuff. And I think the easiest way to understand this, and most of this stuff can be broken down to be really simple, is think of a sports game. So pick a sport, Michael.
Football.
Great. Now let's imagine that we removed all the rules from football. So now I can come onto the field with bazookas, AK-47s. Does that make for a good competition?
No.
No, obviously. Because I murder the other team, and it's over in 2 seconds, and we're not challenged and pushed to be better and better and better and better. Now, on the other hand, let's go the other way, and let's imagine that we take all the rules of football, but now there are millions of rules. And there are so many rules that now, we're just so deathly afraid of everybody getting injured that now everybody has to roll around in one of those big, sort of spherical bubbles, right? And, there's no contact at all. There's nobody's feelings are getting hurt. They all have to talk to each other in a super respectful way. They have to respect each other's space so that nobody is allowed to go on to the other side of the field, right? Is this a good sport?
I don't think so.
No, it's terrible. So there is a sweet spot for how much regulation you have in a market. It's a real sort of Goldilocks principle. You can have too much regulation, you can have too little regulation, or you can get it just right. And the challenge is, and what the conversation that we should all be having is, what is that Goldilocks spot? But when I got Peter Schiff on the show, he's just like, government is the problem. And he keeps on coming back to the idea that government is always the problem and that you have to just get rid of all government, right?
Right.
And that's not capitalism. That's anarchy.
And him and
um,
Michael Malice together.
yeah, but the difference is I really like Michael Malice.
Oh yeah, of course.
Michael's hilarious and remarkably self-aware. And a large part of this, and sort of a lot of what the Brian Callen show comes down to, is a lot of this is driven by our own experiences growing up. A lot of it is driven by our childhoods. A lot of it is being driven by culture. And the most recent time that I had Michael Malice on, he was talking about sort of realizing, wait, like, Russian culture causes me to do all these screwed up things, right? So he had his friend John Durant, who is also a friend of the show, on over to his apartment, and the doorbell rings, and John Durant just goes and opens the door. And to Michael, coming from Russia, to Michael Malice, this seems crazy coming from Russia. Like, you just open your door for a stranger, and that's the thing, is that Russia is a very low trust environment, right? Everybody is always trying to fuck everybody. Nobody trusts anybody, and you especially don't trust the government. And given the experience of the Soviet Union, you can understand why they don't trust the government. But the result is that, does that affect Michael's view of politics, where he thinks that we should have no government? Of course it does. And in his own time, Michael will work through that. But the difference between Michael Malice and Peter Schiff is that Michael Malice is receptive to being challenged. Michael Malice, I think, is fundamentally, he's very empathetic, and he really genuinely does care about the injustices in the world, and is primarily concerned with trying to solve the problem, and will do whatever it takes to solve the problem. And, Peter, whatever his family's personal struggles, which is some of the tweets that I've gotten, the reality is that he just is sort of very content to promote the worldview that he already has. He's not fundamentally interested in having his worldview challenged. That's the brand that he has. That's what he sells. That's what his podcast is based on. Again, like, I could Larry King Peter Schiff and just sort of jerk him off and be like, oh, Peter, like, this is so amazing what you're doing.
Let's buy gold bars.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you interview John Durant?
I did interview John Durant, and are you talking about the fact that the name was misposted on the episode?
Okay, yeah. Only because I was like, this guy sounds just like Peter Schiff.
Yeah.
I thought it worked for him, but they'll have to check that out. Both of them. I'm interested in hearing John Durant as well.
Yeah, John was great. Again, like, we didn't agree with John on everything. But John fundamentally is, he's an open-minded guy. He's responsive to the science. He's reasonable. He's willing to have his mind change. And we talk through things on the podcast. And, fundamentally, I think everybody there learned something. And we saw some other perspectives. And that was great. And so we all emerged a little bit wiser. There was idea sex had. Whereas, the interview with Peter was just masturbating in a corner. And I was like, come have idea sex with me, Peter. And he was just like, ah.
So this is, I'm forgetting the quote, but it's something like, after a certain amount of time, taking in information is, I'm paraphrasing now, is laziness. I don't know if you've ever heard a quote like this, meaning Peter and a lot of people, Trump, at some point they're like, listen, this is my mindset, my worldview. I'm going straight forward with this because everything else kind of slows me down a little bit. What do you feel about taking in too much information?
Well, I think there's, firstly, how complex is the world, Michael? Is it complex?
Yeah, unbelievably complex.
Yeah, unbelievably complex. I think, the point is that, in terms of, like, the theme of this podcast, what do we know? A large part of what has happened is that, in the 50s, there was authority, right? Science and academia were authority. And they just sort of said certain things, and people mostly went along with them. And, the scientific establishment, the academic establishment, and the media were aligned. And so there was a consistent worldview that was promoted. Now, by the way, there were real problems with that worldview, right? Like, a lot of the psychology and the beliefs about intelligence and education, which, we've talked about previously in terms of the straight A conspiracy that were promoted, were not were not good ones. They were fundamentally destructive, and they ruined a lot of people's lives. So it's not that that was a great thing, but now what's happened is the internet has come along. Everybody has a microphone. You can have a podcast. I can have a podcast. Peter Schiff can have a podcast. And suddenly people are broadcasting their beliefs. And a lot of them feel emotionally true to people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, a lot of what libertarianism comes down to is that it's just all about maximizing freedom at any cost. And they don't understand that that's anarchy. Um, but there's a lot of people who, because they're particularly pissed off at the government, and they may have real reasons to be pissed off, they sort of resonate with that. And then, Peter gets validated for that. People are agreeing with him. And then, it's easy to just sort of endlessly. It's not that these people don't like Donald Trump or Peter Schiff. It's not that they don't acquire information. It's just that they're only acquiring information to bolster and to support what they already believe, rather than trying to challenge and find holes in what they believe. And that's, I mean, fundamentally the whole point of mixed mental arts, why you and I can have a productive conversation, is because we're interested in testing our thinking until it can handle anything, until it's foolproof, and until, we can't find any more holes. We will always find holes. But the point is that over time, it becomes harder and harder to find holes.
Almost exactly like martial arts. If you look at mixed martial arts or martial arts in general, these big flamboyant techniques at some point were thought to be ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But now they're actually coming back. It might come full circle where people are bringing in these big techniques. And the thing I guess you always look at, there's never the perfect answer. Their techniques are they'll restrain you, so you have to keep yourself open. But then how do you determine what is fact, false, true? What do you believe in? Do you have a guiding principle, Hunter? I mean, how do you do it?
Well, I think, the scientific principle is a great one, and I was lucky enough to be introduced to that early along. And you have to distinguish between the scientific principle and scientists.
Yes.
Scientists are people, they're flawed, just as, the Christian principle of love thy neighbor as thyself may be perfect. Christians themselves often don't live that principle.
Mm-hmm.
But the scientific principle is just recognizes something very simple, which is that, humans can believe literally anything. Like, if you look at the long history of humanity, you look on the internet, like, there is no shortage of things that humans can believe. And the challenge is to break our existing beliefs in order to form beliefs that are closer to reality. And so what you're trying to do, and I mean, this is what was so great about, working with Brian, and, I just sort of got inadvertently pulled into the MMA community,
Mm-hmm.
but it is such a great analogy, because, you come into the octagon, you've got a certain thing, you've got your fighting style, and then suddenly somebody finds this massive hole in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, fuck, I need to retool my game. Like, I need to, like, fundamentally reinvent things to compensate for that. And then you solve that problem, but then it's like, oh, fuck, somebody found this other hole, right? And, over time, again, like you say, it's not that there's going to ever be, like, a final definitive style. But, even in the last decade, MMA, UFC has come so far because you have a community where everybody is challenging each other. And so everybody has to constantly raise their game, raise their game, raise their game. And, what we want is, it's not necessarily that, there are certain things that are going to end up being, like, if you look at, I'm not an MMA expert, but I would guess that there is a certain common consensus within UFC in terms of, like, you can't just be going in there and boxing, right? Like, you have to have the versatility of jiu-jitsu, grappling, you need to have a ground game, and you need to have, like, all the different parts of the game, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But there is going to be variation, and, there's value to it. So, for example, even though Michael Malice is an anarchist, and I don't think that anarchy is fundamentally the way forward, there's real value in having a conversation with Michael Malice. And the real value is that, it's so easy to get complacent. And you get in the ring with Michael Malice, and, he legitimately, if anybody can convince you that anarchy is a good idea, it's Michael Malice.
Yes, yes. Well, he could definitely be a cult leader.
Exactly.
Very charismatic.
And there's value to that in the sense that, he keeps you on your toes. And you have to think, you have to fundamentally engage, rather than just being dismissing him out of hand. The challenge is to, grapple with him and try and figure out, okay, how do I deal with these points? Like, what do I engage with? Oh, how do I find my way in? Oh, this culture avenue seems like a good one. Let's get him talking about Russian culture, get him reflecting on that, and then we'll see where we go with that. Like, again, not everybody is up for that. Like, some people are up for grappling, and some people are up for being challenged, and some people aren't. Some people just want to, like, do their thing, like, that they've already figured out. And I don't think that serves the world. And I think it's fundamentally destructive and unhelpful, and it just encourages, these cults. Like Peter Schiff has a cult around him. Sam Harris has a cult around him. There are certain podcasters out there who promote a certain worldview that is, emotionally satisfying, but fundamentally does not promote dialogue between groups. It promotes the forming of groups of us and them, and you're either with us or against us. And if you're not with us, then you're an idiot.
Yes, and.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Which was a blog post, which I found that was extremely helpful. Yes, and the improv technique could help you talk to people with different views.
Yeah. And again, like improv is such a great technique. And the sort of the core rule of improv is yes and, right? So, you're on a stage, there's this great thing from Tina Fey, where, she describes yes and in her book Bossy Pants, which is just hilarious, by the way, and well worth a read. But essentially, what she says is, let's imagine that we're two improvers on a stage, and you say, man, it's hot in here. And if I say, no, it's not, right, the improv is over, the scene is over. But if I say, yes, it's hot in here, and then add something onto that, like, I knew we shouldn't have messed with the thermostat, or I knew we shouldn't have climbed into this dog's mouth, or whatever it is, then suddenly now you've got a problem, and now you have to engage with that, right? And we can have this back and forth, and that's idea, sex, and action, right? That's cultural evolution. That's how you unleash the wisdom of crowds, is when we start feeding off of each other and building and building and building. But, not everybody is a good improv partner. Some people are great improv partners. Michael Malice is a great improv partner. You're a great improv partner. John Duran is a great improv partner. Brian Callen is a great improv partner. I did not find Peter Schiff to be a great improv partner. And again, like, what do you do? Like, it's if you're really trying to, it's sort of like, this is the tension, because if you really want to encourage idea sex, well, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I could try and bring literally everyone into the fold from day one. But the conclusion I've sort of come to, and again, I'm always willing to reopen that discussion, but the conclusion I've come to is, like, let's just get a community of the people who are already up for this, and really get that conversation going and test our thinking. And, like, if you think about the early days of, MMA, right, mixed martial arts, like, we could spend our time trying to convince the boxing purists that, like, they should be doing MMA. But probably they're not going to do that. So let's just get the people who are excited to do MMA, and let's develop the art form. And then once they see how cool it is, and when it starts to get really developed, then people will start jumping into what we're doing.
I had a discussion with Michael Malice maybe a year ago, describing, how I love how Brian will fantasize about how he'll attack bad guys. But my fantasy is to get an octagon and have Michael Malice versus Hunter, not fighting, but a debate. And then you just go around the world and just bring in different people. Obviously, these debates, if you watch them online now, you can't even have a debate. in most, maybe Sam Harris, which he stopped the debate circuit. Nobody really will ever change their opinion.
Yeah, and that's a real problem. I mean, because I think and that's sort of. I mean, what we're doing here, Michael, and I mean, I think it's important to recognize. Brian and I are doing this mixed mental arts thing within. We started within our podcast, but we really like this is not about one dojo, right? Like we need lots of dojos, and then collectively we need to sort of figure out this sport.
Yes.
And the challenge with the mixed mental arts as opposed to mixed martial arts is like mixed martial arts is pretty clear when someone loses, right? Like you got tapped out, right? Like you got you passed out, your face is a bloody mess, whatever it is, you can't walk, it's pretty obvious when you physically lost, like it's all visible. The problem is that it requires real integrity in mixed mental arts. If you want, you can continue to sort of rationalize what you already believe, and sort of pretend that you didn't get tapped out, or pretend that someone didn't find a real hole in your thinking, and just sort of stick to your guns and sort of stick to the spiel you've already got. And so, for example, like, you could put Sam Harris and a religious guy in a room together, and, you can just have this very unsatisfying discussion where Sam is still convinced that he's right and the religious guy is still convinced that he's right, right? But doing mixed mental arts, I think, firstly, it requires real emotional awareness, right? Because you have to be willing to be honest to the community about how you feel about different things, right? So, like, if you, for example, if you hate government and you just think that all government is bad, then all you're going to do is see its faults, and you're not going to see any of its virtues, right? And you can just endlessly rationalize that. Or if you're Sam Harris, then I would think it's fair to say that Sam does not like God, right? Is that a fair assessment?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah. So, but again, like it's very much, Peter Schiff and, Sam Harris, it's very much the same thing because they have certain feelings about these things, and then they're very good at justifying those feelings pretty endlessly. And it can seem very impressive. But the question is, are those feelings appropriate? So it's the same thing as, racism. Like I could, hate black people and, think whatever I want about black people. Or I could like black people. But the question is, what feelings are appropriate about people who happen to have darker skin? And I would say that, just whether you want to take it morally, ethically, or you want to take it scientifically, the appropriate feeling is to have that people are people, and skin color actually doesn't mean anything except that, I, at high latitudes, my ancestors were better at producing vitamin D with scarce UV light, whereas their ancestors had darker skin to protect the folate in them from breakdown by UV light.
Hunter, am I saying vitamin wrong?
No, I'm saying it wrong.
What about bean?
I'm saying it wrong.
You sure?
Yeah.
Is there a right and wrong way?
Oh, it's because I grew up in England.
Yes.
And so, I got rid of the English accent, but those words I have still not beaten. And so I occasionally I have to put more attention on it, honestly, and train myself out of it. But I say bean and I say vitamin. And then I don't know how often there's also medicine. But so those are the British pronunciations of those words.
Because I've just adapted that, and I'll talk in a New Jersey accent, but then say vitamin and bean because I'm following your lead.
See, but that's the problem is that in this case, Michael, it's the blind leading the blind.
Okay. I'll write that one down. All right. Bean.
But yeah, and sometimes people actually think I'm Canadian because they hear American accent, bean, right? And they're like, are you Canadian? It's hard to make sense of. But, I mean, that is honestly, again, that's another example of idea sex, right? Like, you've taken these two different accents, and you sort of put parts of them together, and you've created something new. Um, and I mean, imagine my accent takes off. Boy, would the world be in trouble. But or any sort of pizza is idea sex, because tomatoes originally came from the Aztecs, right? And so there was no pizza until after Columbus had arrived in the New World. The taco is a product of idea sex. There was no tacos before, in terms of like your beef taco. There was no
Hmm.
beef taco before the arrival of Columbus in the New World. That was that swapping between cultures.
So the book club that
Hmm.
you're putting together, first off, I love it, and I'm very happy to see some of the books I haven't gotten to just yet. But that's the boxing, the kickboxing, the jujitsu for this new mixed mental arts.
Hmm.
That's our core. That's what we're going to be getting everybody into, and that's going to constantly be added to, obviously.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing is that, yeah, it may constantly be added to, but there are a lot of this does come down to certain core techniques. And so there are these sort of, just as there's like, boxing is one of the fundamentals. And there are certain fundamentals to mixed mental arts, right? So we've already talked about some of them, right? One is sort of understanding, that the free market is not a free for all,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that it's about finding this Goldilocks spot of like not too much regulation, not too little regulation. What really unleashes the potential of people, of the crowd, and that's like a pretty simple concept. And we can build on that. Like we can read Luigi Zingales' A Capitalism for the People, or Hernando de Soto's The Other Path, or any of these other books, or Why Nations Fail, and we can sort of expand on that and see that principle extended out. But what you're going to find, I mean, that's the amazing thing, is that a lot of it is about sort of these, just as there are fundamentals to mixed martial arts, and you have to get those fundamentals right in terms of making sure that you know how to throw a punch, knowing how to throw a kick, knowing how to core techniques of grappling. There are just a lot of it is about getting those fundamentals right, and then over time you'll figure out how to piece and combine them together. So it's not going to be that there are, I don't think, thousands of books. I think it's going to be a core set, and I think a lot of it will also be that a lot of these principles will distill down to very simple concepts like idea sex that we can use to make sense of a lot of things. So just as in mixed martial arts, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can put a hook together with other things, right? So there are going to be ways that idea sex, or the sort of Goldilocks principle of regulation, or the goose that lays the golden egg, or yes and, or a lot of these ideas can be used endlessly, and can be used to like solve a lot of problems.
That's where a lot of coaches, Greg Jackson, a famous MMA coach, will say that's where the art comes in.
Yep.
You have to bring the art in at the final stages of knowing all the basics.
Yep.
To shift a couple ideas or shift tracks, Hunter, I'm asking you because you probably have thought about this. I would imagine a great deal, but I'm not sure whose quote this is. But everything popular is wrong. Is that Oscar Wilde?
Sounds plausible. I mean, Oscar could always be relied on to challenge the popular wisdom.
Yeah, okay, so and the first interview I ever did was with Gary Taubes from
Hmm.
because I read the book and I was just absolutely blown away. And now it's pretty common to believe that the war on fat was was a big misstep. And
Yep.
is there any other glaring missteps that we're experiencing right now?
Oh,
Is
the
there's an
list is
avalanche?
long, but I can give you some if you
I
want.
would love to know to confirm or um,
Well,
you go and you tell me a couple of them.
Well, the first one is that, so obviously from the first interview we ever did together, Michael, like a lot of this is, beliefs are really important. Most of our choices are driven by beliefs, and that's why we wrote The Straight A Conspiracy. And a lot of time and energy is focused on, like, this was part of what was so odd about the Peter Schiff interview was he and I talked about, the internet and the power of the internet to move ideas. And, that's why he does this podcast and all of this sort of stuff. And, the problems with education and all that sort of stuff. And then he kept on saying, but it's the government's fault, right? Like, that's his thing. He just keeps coming back to the government. But in practice, like, in terms of changing beliefs or changing values or changing ideas, government could do whatever it's going to do. Like, as long as it doesn't shut down or prevent us from having conversations like this, there's really no barrier to us moving ideas or changing beliefs. And some of those beliefs are vitally important in terms of making sense of the world today. So the first one that I'm going to give you is what's called Descartes' error. And Descartes' error was this idea that Descartes came up with that reason and emotion are separate, right? Thinking and feeling are separate. And, this was a theory about neuroscience that they came up with 400 years ago, and it's massively wrong. It's totally wrong, right?
Okay.
So, and this is one that really slows down how fast people progress. And we'll talk through why. So, in an argument, you get an argument with your significant other, your spouse, a father, mother, friend, some troll on the internet, whatever it is, right? You feel that emotion come up, and you feel how that emotion changes your thinking. So you get so angry, right, that you suddenly can't think clearly, and all you can see are, say, your significant other's faults. When you're in love with someone, right, they seem perfect. They can do no wrong. All you can see are their virtues. We already know, thinking and feeling are linked. But then there are states and times when we don't feel particularly emotional. And so the question is, what's going on there? Have we stopped being emotional? Or is it just that the emotions are sort of below our conscious awareness but are still driving our thinking? And the answer is that they're below our conscious awareness, but they're still driving our thinking. And we know this. You can read you can read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. You can read either of John Haidt's books, either The Happiness Hypothesis or A Righteous Mind, or the one that I think is, the fastest, simplest way to sort of really get this and understand this. And you don't even have to read the book. I can just tell you the story, is Descartes' Error. And Descartes' Error is this book that Antonio Damasio wrote about his experiences with a patient named Elliot. And so Elliot, you can't, as a scientist, you can't ethically and legally just sort of chop bits out of people's brains to see what each part does. That's not legal. Although one time, when I worked at Cold Spring Harbor, there was a German guy in the audience, and there's a guy up on stage, and he's, talking about this disease that they're studying, and he says, it's like Parkinson's disease. That's how it behaves in a test tube, but we don't know how it really behaves in a living person. So the German guy puts his hand up and says, yeah, but why could you not take a biopsy out of the brain of a living person who has this idea, a disease? And, the guy is like appalled and says, generally we don't like to chop the bits out of living people's brains because it tends to lead to paralysis or death. German guy is undeterred, and he says, yeah, but what if you was to take the part out of a brain of someone who is not using it, like a vegetable? The guy is appalled and just sort of is like, I don't really know how to explain ethics to you, like, if you don't understand them.
Yes.
So scientists don't do that. And the result is that, when somebody has to have a bit of their brain chopped out because they have a brain tumor, it becomes an opportunity to learn a lot about the brain that we might not have known otherwise. So Elliot is this guy who has a brain tumor right here, right above his, right at the sort of base of his skull, above his nose. And, the guy has a tumor. He's going to die if we don't chop it out, so they chop it out. And then the question is, how has that affected Elliot's thinking? And it seems like it hasn't affected it at all at first. Like his IQ is still in the 97th percentile. He goes back to his job. His verbal fluency is, he's still talking normally. There seem to be no problems, except that Elliot's decision making goes to shit. Like it utterly is ruined, right? He leaves his wife, and who he's been happily married to for a very long time, and marries a stripper, which every time I tell that, dudes are like, that's not a sign that his thinking's broken. That's a sign that his thinking's working.
Nice.
Even though he's a financial planner, he falls victim to all these different con men. Um, and then finally, he can't decide where to go to lunch. And he sits there from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. trying to figure out rationally where to go to lunch. So he's like, well, let me think about, nutritional value, parking availability, how much seating there is, all these sorts of things. And he's trying to solve lunch from a purely rational perspective. And he can't do it because a lot of how we decide to go to lunch, or how we decide to stay in a marriage, or how we decide to be like, that guy's selling this really good idea of how to make money. It sounds really appealing, but actually I think it's a terrible idea. It's probably too good to be true. Um, and it's driven by feelings, right? I feel like Thai food. I feel like an Italian meatball sub. I feel like fat. I feel like, eating paleo because I want to be healthy or whatever it is. And so what that part of the brain did was it connected thinking and feeling. And when you remove that link, then you find that people can't make decisions. So all of the time, right, if you haven't had what's called your ventromedial prefrontal cortex chopped out of your head, like Elliot, then feelings are driving your thinking. And so you'll hear people say things like, you're being emotional. We're all always being emotional. The question is, what feelings are driving your thinking, and are those feelings appropriate? And what we have as humans is this special mode where we can examine our feelings called reflection. And it even has a facial expression. It's like this, right? And so what ends up happening is that a lot of people, and, to bring it back to Peter Schiff, poor Peter Schiff, um, but, he'll rationalize certain feelings about freedom. And those feelings feel true. That's what's called the naive realism, right? So it feels like, oh, this all makes sense to me. But, the beliefs of every culture, human culture throughout time, have made sense to them. So that your beliefs make sense to you doesn't tell you anything. What you have to do is you have to reflect, and you have to say, what feelings are driving my thinking? And then you say, oh, I hate the government. Okay, what is the consequence of hating the government? I think that it's worthless. Oh, but that also, I now know, I'm emotionally aware enough to know that Shakespeare was right when he said, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So if you think a thing's bad, you're only going to see its faults. If you think a thing's good, you're only going to see its virtues. And it's the same thing as being madly in love with someone, or thinking that someone's a total bitch, right? You can't actually see the person clearly because the emotion distorts your view of them. So in terms of speeding up your own progress as a mixed mental artist, understanding that rationalizing, just sort of like defending what you already feel, is a waste of your time, that fast thinking. And the way to speed your progress up is to do more slow thinking, that reflection, where you're like, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Does this make sense? What are my feelings? And so on and so forth.
Wow, that's just fascinating. Number one,
Yeah.
am I a robot? Is if am I are my decisions basically predetermined already, the way my mind is set up, or can I
Well,
change things?
you can absolutely change things, but what you have to understand is that, where did you get, like, so what you have to be realistic about, like, what is a human being? What are we good at, right? And so humanity's superpower is the ability to upload culture, right? So, as young Michael, right, has no culture. Young Hunter has no culture, right? And, as babies, we are stupid. We are incredibly stupid, right? Like, babies will do things like stick their fingers in electrical power sockets. They'll run out into traffic. They'll drink bleach. They will play with tigers. They will, the number of ways that babies can get themselves killed is limitless, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so parents have to insulate them from that and protect them from that until children have acquired enough culture, enough awareness of how to survive in their environment that they can be trusted to make decisions for themselves. So what but the thing is that you have to understand that this all operates under cultural evolution. So cultures are well suited and well adapted to a particular environment. So if you've got a person who's in the Amazon, they have an amazing culture for that environment, right? Like they've survived there for tens of thousands of years, no problem, right? You or I go into the Amazon, and well, we've all seen Naked and Afraid, or anytime Bear Grylls takes any sort of city slicker into
Mm-hmm.
the wild, like we don't do well, and that's because the culture that we have is not well suited to that environment. But that's the same thing is true if I take some of those Amazonian tribes people and suddenly dump them in the middle of New York City, we're not going to do well. Um, and so you have to understand that, you have uploaded a culture, and that culture is well suited to a particular environment in a particular time in a particular place. But the problem is that very often those cultures long last for, because people are defensive of their cultures. It has feelings of belonging. It has feelings of tribe, community, loyalty to parents. And so values and beliefs can be preserved long past when they stopped serving people's success.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big part of this election, because the world has changed a lot. Technology has raced forward, and the problem is that my mom's family's from Kansas. I have numerous Trump voting uncles. And what they want is they want jobs, and that is 100% understandable. Jobs are important not just for paying your bills, but also for dignity and a sense of purpose and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, they want to contribute to the community. The problem is that their culture is based on the idea of working in a factory. And while Trump has told a simple story that there were 1,000 jobs in your town, those 1,000 jobs have gone to China, I can bring those 1,000 jobs back. The reality is there are larger forces going on where all of this routine work is being destroyed by robots. It's all being automated. So if those over time, as those factories will move to being 1,000 robots and one person watching those robots and maintaining those robots. So there aren't going to be that many jobs for people who are doing routine work. The job will be for people who are knowledge creators, who are capable of having idea sex. But in order to do that, my uncles have to change certain feelings. They have to change their feelings about books. They have to change their feelings about learning. They have to change their feelings about a whole bunch of things. Um, and their culture needs to change because their culture is not now well suited to the modern environment, and that makes people fundamentally uncomfortable. Oh, you're telling me my culture has to change, and so you're going to get kickback and you're going to get pushback on that. But again, it's who is actually trying to help my uncles? Is it me, or is it Donald Trump? And I'm going to tell you, I don't think Donald Trump is actually trying to help them because he's selling them a pleasing fantasy that is not grounded in the reality of what's going on. And I am offering something that is uncomfortable, but grounded in the realities of biology, the realities of human thinking, the realities of the larger technological and economic forces that are going on and that are taking away these jobs. But which one are people going to choose? I mean, the pleasing fantasy is awfully pleasing.
Yes, that's how you win an election. I
Yeah.
mean, they're like he's lying. I'm like, oh, that's how you win an election, as far as I've seen. Uh, and I don't want to go down all those rabbit holes because I want to make sure you get your whatever you're going to get done today, Hunter. And I just had some quick fire questions. Do you
Mm-hmm.
set goals? Like, do you look at 2017 and say, okay, I'm going to accomplish this, this, and this? Is that how you operate, or are you kind of in the moment?
No, I think there's a lot of sort of like there's some of that sort of productivity stuff is super helpful. Like David Allen has this very simple idea Do, delegate, or dump. You either, if something takes less than 2 minutes, you do it. If you can pass it off to someone else to do, you pass it off as quickly as you can so you don't have to think about it. And if you're not going to either do it or delegate it, then you just dump it. You don't do it. And I think that sort of tool is fantastic because, it's really about freeing up your headspace, right? Like what drives people nuts, the insanity of worry, is having a million things running through your head endlessly, right? But I think that, again, like there is a pleasing fantasy to sort of setting like goals for 2017. But there's a great, I think it's Clausewitz. I can't remember the exact quote, so you have to forgive me for butchering it. But there's essentially it's this sole principle of warfare, which is that essentially after the first engagement, all plans become worthless.
Yes.
So you can sit there and you can make all the military plans that you want, right? Like I can plan out in my head how I think an MMA fight is going to go, but then I step into the ring, I do something, my opponent does something. Oh fuck! Now my plan is shot, right? So I think the more useful way to think about this, or at least the way that I've come to think about this, is improv, or an MMA fight where you do what you're doing, but constantly you're assessing how is the world reacting, what is the environment, and then you're adjusting and you're adjusting and you're adjusting. But the compass and the thing that pulls you forward is not sort of these, not sort of like small short-term goals, but like what is your big large goal? What is the thing that pulls you through, right? Like, it's sort of like, okay, you want to win the UFC championship. You don't know how you're going to get there. You just, you're training, you're training, you're training. You're like, oh, I'm up against this opponent. I analyze this opponent. I figure out how I'm going to get this opponent. And then, you're thinking, oh, who might be next? But really, you're just focused on this challenge. You do that challenge and then adjust, 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 adjust. But you're constantly having to adjust. And I think, we can get overly wrapped up in sort of the pleasing fantasy that, yeah, we can plan, a year in advance.
Improvise.
And you just don't know.
Improvise, improvise, improvise.
Yep.
Number 2, why Los Angeles, Hunter? Because you've basically been all over. You must have favorite countries, favorite cities. Los Angeles is, your guesstimation, is fitting all of the needs, weather, culture, food.
Well, so it was funny because when my dad, because moving around with my dad, he came out here for the first time and sort of looked around and was like, yeah, this is as good a base as any. That's fundamentally, having moved around a lot, that's how we think about these things. You need somewhere to hang your hat. And Los Angeles is as good as any. It has good access to a lot of things. It's big, it's dynamic. There are things that I particularly like about Los Angeles, which is that it doesn't have a well-defined culture. It's really sort of very much this melting pot, and all these weird cultures are shoved up together. And there's a great quote from Richard Armour, who was a sort of a wit in I think, I don't remember when, so I'm not gonna say. But he had this ditty which was leap my friends with joy, or weep my friends with sorrow. For what California is today, the rest will be tomorrow. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. There are a lot of things that California pioneers that then sort of spread out around the world, including the insanity that is 2016. So when I moved out here 12 years ago, one of the things that really struck me is that you would see people driving around and they had all these bumper stickers on their cars, and they were just together in the weirdest combinations. You were like, wait a minute, vegans for Hitler? Like, I don't understand. And they were like, no, Hitler was a vegan. Like, a lot of people don't know that, but like, he really cared about animals. And you're like, what? Or Scientologists for truth, or whatever it is. But like, the weird combinations, the ways in which, because again, like a lot of this comes down to idea sex, the ways in which different traits have sort of split up and then recombined in weird ways. And that's now the experience of the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you go on the internet and you're talking to someone and you're like, okay, we're having a conversation. I think this conversation is going well. We seem to be agreeing about a lot of things. Fundamentally, I think we're culturally the same and sort of come from the same worldview. And then suddenly you're like, but this thing is so crazy, right? And then instead of them coming back with like, oh yeah, man, that thing is so crazy, they're like, I believe that very seriously, and I think that you've fallen prey to a conspiracy from the government or big pharma or whatever it is. So that and I think there's some truth to this. I also just like the weather, and so you come up with reasons to justify living anywhere. But there is like California is a great place for idea sex because it's just such an orgy of ideas, and there's a lot of weirdness, and I fucking love that, frankly.
Good. Yeah, I agree with all those points. Um, that's about it. I could talk to you for hours, Hunter, and I will be bothering you in the future. Um, we'll put this together in a nice video presentation, but if there's anything that we can do on this coast as far as multimedia or web or anything like that, just let us know.
Well, the thing that I would mostly like is, do you want to become a mixed mental arts dojo?
Yes, I do.
There you go. Great. So
Okay.
we need as many dojos as possible. We all need to be evolving it, and then together we need to figure out. Like we need the Gracies. We need to figure out. Okay, how does this? Because like you said, like debate doesn't drive anything. It just becomes this thing where we attack each other, and then somehow we both go away feeling that we were right and we won. Like you can, we all saw that in the presidential debates where fundamentally both sides were like, "Oh, my candidate nailed it."
Yeah, that was it. What we'll do is we'll put together a website and then we'll have
Yep.
some federation and some governing rules.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, but I think it'll be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited about the MMA community because obviously, like, they get it. Like, they get that if you just have one fighting style, that this is dumb.
yes.
So awesome.
Hunter, you're the man. Keep doing
You're the
what you're
man.
doing. We love it at this end, and we'll be following you very closely.
Well, I hope you'll be co-creating with us. That's what we really
I'll
need.
be co-creating, but
Love it.
Hunter, enjoy your day. Thank you very, very much.
All right, I'll talk to you soon, Michael.